Genesis 38, beginning verse 1. And it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son and named him Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. And she bore still another son, and named him Shelah, and it was in Kezeb that she bore him. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, Go in to your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. And Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So it came about that when he went in to his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground, in order not to give offspring to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so he took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, I am afraid that he too will die like his brothers. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Now after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And it was told to Tamar, Behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's garments, and covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, Here now, let me come in to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What will you give me that you may come in to me? And he said, Therefore, I will send you a kid from the flock. She said, Moreover, Will you give a pledge until you send it? And he said, What pledge shall I give you? And she said, Your seal, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her, and went in to her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and departed, and removed her veil, and put on her widow's garments. And when Judah sent the kid by his friend, the Adulamite, to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of her place, saying, Where is the temple prostitute who is by the road at Enaim? But they said, There was no temple prostitute here. So he returned to Judah and said, I did not find her. And furthermore, the men of this place said, There has been no temple prostitute here. Then Judah said, Let her keep them, lest we become a laughingstock. After all, I sent the kid, but you did not find her. So it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is also with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, Bring her out, and let her be burned. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. And she said, Please examine and see whose signet ring and cords and staff are these. And Judah recognized them and said, She is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not have relations with her again. And it came about at the time she was giving birth, that behold, there were twins in her womb. Moreover, it took place while she was giving birth, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, This one came out first. But it came about as he drew back his hand that, behold, his brother came out. Then she said, What a breach you have made of yourself. So he was named Perez. And after his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, he was named Zerah. Okay, we'll go back to 38 verse 1 and put this in context again. So, actually we're going to kind of go back to 37. Oh, I'm so sorry. So in Genesis 37:2, if you'll remember, Isaac has died, and so we're going through the lineage of his two sons. So Isaac died, we did Esau, he became the Edomites, and now we're doing Jacob's genealogy. You can see there in verse 2, these are the records of the generations of Jacob. So last week we looked at Joseph, and this week we're looking at Judah, which is two of his sons. So to put that in context. And, okay, so then in 38:1 it says, at that time. So last week we saw Joseph, his brother sold him into slavery. We saw that take place last week. So that's saying at the same time. Notice in 38:1 it says, and it came about at that time. Well, let me read 37:36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar's officer and the captain of the bodyguard. So Joseph's been sold into slavery, and that it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers. And so just recap a couple of things about Judah that happened last week. In 37:26, let's just talk about last week. So Joseph had these dreams that they were going to bow down to him. The brothers became very envious. They hated him, and we saw that hatred escalate. And then the brothers were out with the sheep. And so Joseph went to check on his brothers, and when he did, they saw him from a distance because he was wearing this very elaborate robe. And so they saw him from a distance, and they took him, they stripped the robe, threw him into a pit. And they were going to kill him, but Reuben said, no, let's not kill him, let's just put him in a pit. And now in chapter 37, verse 26, and Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. So this whole selling him was Judah's idea. And his brothers listened, and they decided to sell him. And like when we talked about last week, it would not be normal for Joseph to just willingly go and not say a word. I mean, he probably put up a fight. It would have been very traumatic. But anyway, they sell him. And then still in chapter 37, but skipping down to verse 34, so they didn't just sell him. They sell him. They take his elaborate robe that he loved to wear, and they dipped it in goat's blood and implied that he had been killed by wolves or killed by something. And so then when they come back to Jacob, I'll start in 32. And they sent the vari-colored tunic, we know it as Joseph's robe of many colors, and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please examine to see whether it is your son's tunic or not. And he examined it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And so he was grieved. And Judah was the one who came up with this plan. And then Judah has to see his father's just horrible grief and mourning. And so that could have played a part in why at this time Judah departs from his brothers. So I don't know if it was just unbearable to see his death. We don't know why, but just interesting that the events that took place. And then he departs from his brothers. So he leaves his brothers. And the other thing that Cleta pointed this out last week, but we'll look at it again. Back in Genesis 37, Joseph's dream, 37:10, Joseph's had two dreams, and he related it to his father and said to his brothers and to his father, and his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come and bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" So these dreams were that his family was going to bow down to him. Well, that infuriated them. And so I put in the actual fulfillment of this is in Genesis 42:6. So, this is a ways away. But I just want you to see how they got so worked up and so envious and jealous over an event that's not that big of a deal. I mean, it is, but it's not.
It was an event that saved their lives.
Exactly, yes. The very brother they rejected became the brother who saved them. In 42:6, now Joseph was the ruler of the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brother came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. So when they come into Egypt, there's a famine in the land. They go to Egypt, and there's their brother, and they all bow down. And that's the fulfillment of this dream that angered them so much. Okay, all that to say, today we're talking about Judah. Well, Judah is the one who's really going to be the lineage of the kings. His lineage is going to lead to King David and then eventually to Christ. So he's really the one that's going to produce kings, not Joseph. So I just thought that was so interesting that they got all worked up. And Joseph's really the one that's going to father the kingly lineage. And so even after Israel splits and you have the northern kingdom and then you have Judah, Israel has northern kingdom. They'll have kings that aren't from Judah, and none of them are good. And then Judah will produce the kings, and some good, some bad, but King David to Christ, and that's the lineage of the kings, is through Judah. So I just thought it's interesting that he's the one that got all worked up, and he's actually going to be the one that brings about the kings. Okay, so back to Genesis 38.
In a way, doesn't Judah reap what he sows? I mean, he made his dad miserable with his idea and his plans, and then God takes away his oldest two sons. It's like, you want to see what suffering's like, I'll give it to you twofold.
I did not even think about that. You're right.
And his inheritance too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so now we're in 38:1. So it came about at that time, so at the time, last week's events with Judah, with Joseph. So at that time, Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So Judah marries a Canaanite. And we've been in Genesis, followed Abraham. It's been so abundantly clear. They were not to intermarry with the Canaanite people at all. They were not to intermarry with Canaanites. And that's the first thing Judah does. He leaves his family and then marries a Canaanite. And she's not even named. Her father's name is Shua. She's the daughter of Shua. She's not even named here. He took her and went into her, so she conceived and bore a son and named him And here, I don't know if this matters, but Judah named the firstborn. Judah named him Then she conceived again and bore a son, and this time she named him Onan. And she bore still another son, and she named him Shelah. And I wrote down how to pronounce this, and I completely forgot. Kaziv is how you pronounce it. And it means falsehood or lies. like it was to lie, tell a lie, be a liar. It's the city of falsehood or the city of lies. And so that's where they're living, that's where they're conceived, that's where they're born. That's where Judah went when he left his family. And I mean, I think I think it's human nature that when you're overwhelmed with guilt or you want to leave, you don't want to be around the very people that remind you of your sins or your shortcomings. So he leaves, goes to Canaan where they weren't supposed to go at all. And even Adulamite, Canaanite was the big tribe. Adulamite was a smaller tribe within the Canaanites. I mean, this is just Canaanite. Absolute rebellion to the word of God. Okay, and then verse 6. Okay, so this chapter is going to cover. So when Joseph was taken into captivity, we're 22 years away from them going into Egypt as slaves. They're gonna move to Egypt and be in bondage in Egypt. So we're 22 years out. And so this chapter is going to cover 22 years. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. And at first, I couldn't get the timeline to work because how quickly things happen here. But we're going to see this in verse 8. Then Judah, in verse 6. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. So Judah goes and finds a wife. And from what I read, the Canaanites were immoral, like very immoral. And so it was not unusual. Because if you remember, Jacob was 84 before he got married. And so to get all this in 22 years, they had to have been really young. But the fathers would have married their sons off early to keep them from indulging in this immorality that was so prevalent among the Canaanites. And so it was to prevent more immorality. So he would take a wife, and he could have been very young. And actually, this is going to be significant too. The age, from what I've read and understand, that when a son gets married was at the discretion of his dad or his parents. They would have been at their discretion when they determined, there wasn't a legal age. Like when you turn 21, you can get married. There wasn't a legal age. It was kind of at the parents' discretion when they married. And so he could have been still a teenager, even 19 or 18 or 19 when he married. So now Judah took a wife for and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. I was thinking, I don't even know. There's no indication of what kind of evil. All I could think of was Cain slew Abel, and he still lived and has a lineage, or had one. So I'm not sure what kind of evil this was. But very interesting that he was evil in the sight of the Lord, which was the same language we saw prior to the flood. Evil in the sight of the Lord. So I don't know how the rest of society looked at it, but it was evil to God, for sure. And then the Lord took his life. Then in verse 8, Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." And this has a levirate marriage, and it's going to become law when Israel becomes a nation, that if the brother dies and he has no offspring, then the younger brother would marry him and carry on the family name. And so I was just no. And so Onan was doing his duty.
But it's only the firstborn, right? Anything after that, isn't that
I mean,
his sons, his lineage?
Right, yes. So the first son that he conceived with Tamar would have been the lineage, and then he had fulfilled his duty. Right. From that point forward, they would have been his sons. Yes. Okay. And so, and it was very specific to raise up offspring for your brother so that his lineage wouldn't be cut off. And Onan knew, verse 9, that the offspring would not be his. So it came about that when he went in to his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. Okay, this would have been, well, obviously it was so displeasing in the sight of the Lord that the Lord took his life also. But what's at stake here is the kings are going to come from Judah. And not just King David, but our Savior is going to come from this lineage. And so, I mean, to not carry on the lineage was very evil in the sight of the Lord. But on a more practical level, if Onan has this son and it carries on his father's name, not only, so right now there's 2 sons left, Onan and Shelah. Well, if the firstborn has children, now not only is inheritance split 3 ways, it's split 4 because the firstborn would have gotten a double portion, which would have gone to this firstborn son, and then Onan and Shelah would have split the rest, but they would have gotten a double portion. So it was a greedy thing, it was a selfish thing, and like I said, the bottom line is this is the lineage of Messiah, and to just blatantly not, yeah. So it was very displeasing in the sight of the Lord. And so the Lord took his life also. So boom, boom. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." So first of all, Judah was not right in sending her away. Once she married into the family, she's family, and she should have remained under his care until the time came. The other thing is, like Shelah's age for marriage was at his discretion. So we don't know how old he was. But we see here in the second part of the verse, for he thought, so he doesn't say it, but he thinks, I'm afraid that he too may die like his brothers. So in other words, being married to Tamar caused the death, not evil. So,
Well,
so,
I mean, if the wasting the seed was the cause of Onan's death, I mean, who knows how many people really knew that?
exactly.
So, I mean, there was no way that they knew. I mean, was probably obvious, outwardly
Yes.
obvious, but Onan, it might not have been so outwardly
That is
obvious.
such a good point.
To their perception, it could have.
Yes. But the other thing is the Canaanites were very superstitious, and we'll see that play out in this too. Very superstitious. And so he was kind of assimilating to that rather than the trust in the Lord and, God's the giver and the taker of life, and you trust God. You're entrusting his life with God, not Tamar.
Is Tamar Canaanite?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they're all, Canaanites, so Judah sends her away, and he says, until my son Shelah grows up. So he's implying that he's going to fulfill his obligation to Tamar, which he has no intention of ever doing that. And the other thing is, Tamar's bound. I mean, she is, I think had there not been another son, I think she would have been released to go and marry into another family. But because there was another heir, she's bound to this family. I mean, she is obligated to this family, and they're obligated to her. But because there's another son, so he's sending her away and to a very hopeless situation. In fact, the commentaries that I read talked about in this time period, that was cruel. That was absolutely cruel to put her in this position where she could never remarry. She was under her father's care and had no intentions of giving this son.
And she wouldn't have any way of even taking care of her.
She's helpless. Yeah, she's totally helpless.
Because she won't inherit anything.
Nothing. She's totally helpless here. And it was so wrong of
Don't
Judah.
you wonder how come they had a rule like that?
Yes. I mean, but we're back to the women in this culture. That was their
no value, yeah.
just reproducing and.
But it was God's rule that if a brother dies,
But we don't have the law yet, but it is going to be in Israel's law. Absolutely.
so why was that? To protect the lineage.
the lineage and the heritage and the property, everything.
And it didn't matter if the brother was married.
Mm-mm.
It was still his duty.
There was some provision that if you couldn't do it, then it would go to the next brother or what. But I'm not that familiar with that law, but I do know enough that that Sheila was supposed to be given to her to at least conceive one. Okay. Verse 12. Now, after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. So they've had this friendship for a very long time. And from what I understand, and you can help me with this, but the sheep shearing was an annual event. It only occurred once a year. Is that correct? Okay. And then they had a huge a big pagan festival at the sheep shearing.
Mm-hmm.
This was a big cause for celebration, and so Judah goes.
The wool buyers would be in, and you'd be kind of like entertaining the buyers, and everybody would come in and party.
It's I think the word was hilarity that was used to describe it. So So Judah goes, and notice his wife has died, and he's done his time of mourning.
Did you look up how long that was usually?
No.
There wasn't a specific time?
There will be later, but I don't know what it was at this time. I don't know what would have been. Does anyone know what would have been a considerable amount? Do you know? Is your comment? Okay, I don't know. And that's a good question. I don't know how long that would have been. Let me see. Taking the full 40 days. And the Egyptians mourned 70 days. So at Joseph's death, the Egyptians wept for 70 days.
So it was 40
to
for
70, I don't know, somewhere there. So, I'm at there too. And he's still hanging out with his Adulamite friend. And then verse 13, and it was told to Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, and sat in the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Sheila had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. And so they suspect that however long this was, that Sheila had reached the age of Onan. When Onan was given to her in marriage, he had reached that age and exceeded it and wasn't given. So that's when she starts putting this together. And like I said, she's bound. She's bound. And she's kept her end. She's been, she's still wearing her widow's garments. She's still waiting. She's done everything she was obligated to do. I thought this was interesting. How to say this? She covers herself. And I just thought that was there, because that's not what you think of when you think of a harlot today. They're showing everything they can. So anyway,
That's been pretty common.
Yes, that's how they would. Yes, and one commentary from the 1800s had said, they were covering their shame, because even then it was a shameful act. So, but now it's.
But the one that laid with Leah instead of Rachel, he didn't know the difference. So, I mean, did she have her head covered too? I just wondered if they all covered their heads.
I don't know what made this different. What made this harlot attire? But anyway, she covers herself with a veil, wraps herself, sat in the gateway, and I don't even know how you pronounce this, obviously.
So maybe that was what their costumes were.
It
at that
must have
time.
been. Yes, it must have been.
I just wonder how she got there before he did.
I don't know. You
Someone
know.
said he already left, and then
Yes.
she was there when.
Yes, and I, you know, without the social networking that we have today, word spread. It spread even without all of our texting. It
They
spread.
may have had to stop socialize though. It's a
Yeah.
good
They
old
may have
boy
stopped
thing.
on the way.
Yes. Mm.
Oh, the sheep.
Okay, so she goes to the road. She knew which way he would come. She goes and waits. And then verse 15, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So when he sees her, he thinks she's a harlot. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, "Here now, let me come into you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. Okay, it's not okay to hire a prostitute. I mean, it's not. That's what he thinks he's doing, and that's not okay. But anyway, he thinks that's what he thinks he's hiring a prostitute. And we'll talk about the temple prostitute in a minute, but that is not the language used here. It's pure prostitute. So, you know, his wife has died. He's done his days of mourning. So, you know, I don't know if it was just a pure lust. You know, no self-control moment. I don't know what possessed him to think that's okay. But he thinks it's a harlot, so he goes to hire her. And he didn't know it was his daughter-in-law. This, because of the laws, and she was in the family, and she was under his care, this was considered incest. So, but he doesn't know what he's doing, and so he thinks he's hiring a prostitute. And she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" And he said, "Therefore I will send you a kid from the flock." She said, "Moreover, will you give me a pledge until you send it?" So I think that was a normal price, a kid or a goat. I mean, this doesn't sound like she's in the business for money. I mean, she's not doing it for the money at all. I mean, she's not, which I think is apparent on every level, but just confirming. And then, and he said, verse 18, and he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she said, "Your seal, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him.
Now, when you read all of that, you think he must have really thought she was something to have given all of that.
I mean,
Or desperate, he was really
Yeah,
desperate.
just-
Or it would have been 40 days of mourning.
I know. Yeah,
Which one was desperate? She was?
He was
was.
desperate, he was just ready.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
He
And
was
she
just-
was probably the only one there because it said they
Yeah.
hadn't seen anybody
Yeah.
there earlier, so.
That just always struck me
It's-
kind of strange that he
it's-
would just,
it's not very smart. It just, and she was so smart to think to ask for those things. And like the seal would have been his signet ring.
And she had to be.
Well,
I mean, that's
Very
like, give me
good.
your driver's license and your social security. I mean, that's,
And you wonder how quickly he gave it up. Like it
I
just says it here, but maybe there was some back and forth.
You
and
hope.
negotiation going on.
you hope, but
I
it
don't
just
know.
seems
He's
like
chomping at
he's
the
so.
I want to know what she was really after when she went there. Was she hoping for Judah? Was she hoping for Judah? Like, what was she hoping by doing what she did?
She was desperate.
Yeah.
Exactly what she did.
She was desperate
Yeah, I think-
to lower
I think
herself
it was-
to do that.
I think she was hoping for just what she got.
Yes, to carry on Er's
Her, yeah.
name and lineage, and
But
yes.
it's amazing just one, we don't know it's just one, do we?
Yeah.
No, but it's amazing to me that they were always ready to conceive.
I
Yeah,
know.
see, that's
It's
what I mean.
just,
Were
it's
they
so
just
divine.
fertile all
It's
the
so
time?
divine. Yeah, I do think it was very divine. You know, yeah, obviously. So the seal would have been his signet ring, and then from what I understand, the cord would have been the cord that the ring was on. They would have carried it like that. And a well-to-do man would have had a cord to carry his signet ring. And then his staff, and I thought this was interesting. Of course, they're wooden walking sticks, wooden staff, but it would have been carved. The head of, which we've seen those, but I just didn't realize it was so common here. They would have carved the head. It would have been hand carved, and so it would have been very personal, a very personalized walking stick with his own personal touch to it. Everyone who knew him would have known this was his staff. And yes, he just willingly gives it up. I mean, and he does it so willingly. He knows he's going to pay. I mean, he's not worried about that. He must have trusted her, I don't know. But he knows he's going to pay. So he's just fully expecting that she'll keep her into the bargain and he'll keep his. And it's just, it's hard for us in this day and age where nobody keeps their word, you know, and you have to have a lawyer and a contract for everything. But, you know, it was a business transaction. Okay. So, the end of verse 18. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and departed. So, like, immediately she gets up, and immediately she removes her veil and puts on her widow's garments again. She goes back to being the widow. And then,
I think that also verifies that she knew exactly what she was doing.
yes.
She had
Yes. Yes. Yes, she was not in this for the money. She wasn't changing lifestyles. It was specifically when she found out Judah was coming. I mean, she's like so determined to carry on Er's lineage. And okay, verse 20. Then Judah sent the kid by his friend, the Adulamite. This is some friend. To receive the pledge from the woman's hand. He did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, saying, Where is the temple prostitute who is by the road of Enaim? But they said, There has been no temple prostitute here. Okay, so this was just an interesting FYI about the temple prostitute, which I find it so intriguing that so many of these false religions involve impurities, abuse of this act. And so that was interesting. But
if they're doing it for their God.
exactly.
I mean,
and that's what you would do. And it would not be uncommon to have them at the sheep shearing event, because if you engaged a temple prostitute, then it was pleasing to the fertility god, and your sheep would have a prosperous year, or very fertile year.
We can make an analogy in all of this to what's happening with Super Bowl weekend. Did you hear all they were talking about on Good Morning America, where all the prostitutes have now converged on that area and are even advertising?
Oh my goodness! Oh my
So,
goodness!
I mean,
Yes,
it just continues.
right. Nothing new. Nothing new.
Well, I have something on my web, because I've been looking on the website.
Yeah.
It said that primarily addressing widows was likely to have been 3 months that they can remarry.
Okay.
So if they're going to remarry somebody, especially in a family, it's 3 months. It can be a year to 2 years depending on how strict your family is.
Okay, that's interesting.
So it's very fluid.
That is very interesting.
Well, that 3 months was probably because you wanted to be sure and didn't know whose lineage.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought. But so because this isn't the same term used harlot, but not temple prostitute. So Judah did not think he was engaging a temple prostitute, but we don't know if that's what he told his friend, or of course his friend was with him. Some friend, yeah. Now find a friend that will
What
keep
goes
you.
on in
Yeah,
the sheep shearing festival stays.
I guess it happens in Timna, stays in
Yeah.
Timna. Yes, I know. Yeah. Okay.
My Bible calls it a cult prostitute.
Yes, yes, that's a
Shrine.
very good, yes. And that's what it, I mean, so he didn't really think he was, I mean, I don't think he had gone that pagan. I think he was just a widow and whatever. So I don't know if the Adulamite was saying temple prostitute to help save face. Or, you know, why the change of wording, if it started with him or if Judah, I don't know. But
Maybe
anyway,
that's
very
why he
interesting.
trusted her more too.
That's true. That's true. Oh, that's true. Okay. So verse 23. Well, actually 22. So he returned to Judah and said, I did not find her. And furthermore, the men of the place said, there has been no temple prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep them, lest we become a laughingstock. So evidently there would have been a lot of ridicule and humiliation had he been found out that he thought he hired a harlot and she wasn't really a harlot. There would have been some. So in order to save his reputation, he just keeps it. And one quote was, I wrote this quote down because it was just good. If I can find it. Oh, lighter is the loss of money than of character. And so, yeah, that pretty well sums up that verse.
Well, I keep thinking that Judah is, you know, he comes from this lineage. He's got Abraham and Isaac and then Jacob, and it's like all these rich, wealthy, famous,
Yes.
God-fearing men that you don't mess with, and
Yes.
here he is doing this. It's like, that wouldn't be great for his reputation.
No. Okay, so to save face, he just says, let her keep them, lest we become a laughing stock. And don't you love the we? We become, after all, I sent the kid, but you didn't find her. So, you know, I did my part. I offered to pay and couldn't find her. Now, verse 24. Now it was about 3 months later. So, probably showing word's gotten around. So 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law, now, she's still referred to as his daughter-in-law, even though he sent her away. Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot. And behold, she is also with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. What's so intriguing about this, that was not the norm for adultery. It was stoning. If you think to even the Christmas story and Jesus and Joseph and Mary, it was stoning. Women were stoned for adultery. This would have been extreme harsh treatment. And I know this culture was different, but not let's hear her side of the story or let's find. It was verdict, sentence, everything right here. Let her be burned.
Just see, then he'd be off the hook.
Exactly.
And he wouldn't have to feel guilty because he hadn't lived up to his bargain.
It's like, whew. Now I don't have to worry about giving Sheila to her. Or that guilt is gone. Yes. That, and don't you know, all I could think of was politicians. The ones that come down the harshest on certain sins are the ones most guilty. It's like, if I can point out their sin and put all the focus on their sin, maybe no one will notice mine, type thing. So that's why I put this cross-reference to Matthew chapter 7. I haven't really heard this as much as I used to, but this was a very, favorite verse. It's of sinners, of non-believers, of sinners. They love this. Judge not, lest you be judged. Okay, so this is the situation that it's talking about. I'm just going to read this little passage. We'll take a little New Testament detour. So Matthew 7:1, do not judge lest you be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure it will be measured to you. And why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And the whole context of this chapter is about, you will know them by their fruit. It's about being, in fact, the very next verse, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So if you're not going to give what is holy to the dogs, you've got to know what a dog is. So this is about discernment. This isn't saying don't be discerning. And it's also not live and let live. That is not what Jesus is teaching here. Just live and let live. He's saying the very thing that Judah models for us. When you're guilty of adultery, don't come down so harshly on others. You know, get yourself cleaned up. But it's certainly not a call to not call sin sin. We're absolutely to be discerning and to call sin sin. But we don't want to be found the hypocrite where we're running around pointing. What? Oh, I heard this funniest. If I can think of it. A self-appointed inspector. Oh. You know, specologist. Yeah, a self-appointed specologist. That is not our job, you know. But yeah. But anyway, he models exactly what he's talking about here. Don't highlight other people's specks to cover up your own log, because it doesn't really work well. And that's what he seems to be doing here. It's like, I mean, he's the one that hired a harlot, he thought, and here wants to. The other thing I thought was interesting on just an article I read on why adultery was so much more severe on women in this day, and let me just think how he worded it. They didn't want foreign seed to come in to the family by stealth. So it all had to do with the inheritance and the land, and they didn't want a foreign seed to come in and not be given to the rightful heir. So that's one reason that a woman was held to a higher standard than a man on the adultery thing, because they could bring in seed by stealth, foreign seed by stealth. That was funny. And also the shame that it would bring. Okay, so he orders that Tamar be brought in and let her be burned. And it's just so hypocritical because he's so guilty. But I think you're right. I think he was thinking, whew, I don't have to worry about that now. That guilt is gone.
So he had complete authority over her.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
She was the member of that family.
Yes, he was fully responsible. As the patriarch, he's responsible. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I put that in there, release from his promise to give Sheila. And, the other thing that, like with him, like we don't want to become a laughing stock, just that when we're not right with God, it's like it seems to be the tendency to, David did it with Bathsheba when he committed adultery. It's preserve your reputation, not being a man of God and not being right with God, but making others think. And how no better way to make yourself look so self-righteous than to come down so hard on these sins. So anyway. Okay, verse 25. Okay, so he said, bring her out and let her be burned. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. And she said, please examine and see whose signet ring and cords and staff these are. And Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Sheila, and he did not have relations with her again. So, from everything I read, he could have kept up the act. I mean, he could have continued this charade, especially, yeah, he could have, but I mean, that godly sorrow that brings about repentance, he seems to have had this here. At that moment, his conscience is stricken, and he realizes and acknowledges his sin. And the word righteous, from what I read, a better translation would be, she is more right. Like, she's more in the right than I am. Even though what she did was not completely...
One of the things that struck me in reading this part of the passage was Judah didn't say, well, she's a prostitute.
Right.
Maybe it's somebody else's.
Exactly. He could have.
He could have. I mean,
He could have, yes. I mean, he could have kept up the charade. And so, but in Tamar, I mean, everything's on the line with Tamar. When she sends those, this is either do or die. And I couldn't help but think of Esther when she put out the scepter. I mean, this is do or die. And so she obviously saw something in her character that let her, that gave her a glimmer of hope that this could bring him to repentance, rather than, burning. But everything was on the line here. Everything was on the line.
You don't think he thought about the child she was carrying as being in his bloodline?
What do you mean? Oh. I don't know what struck his conscience, but his conscience was, I'm sure he had a flood of things going through his mind. But his first...
He may not even let himself think that.
Yeah. I mean, his first response was, she is more righteous than I. Like,
Yeah.
I have sinned. I was supposed to give my son to her.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. I've withheld her. I mean, it would have been so easy to do the blame game. Well, yeah, those are my things, but she was playing the role of a harlot or whatever. I mean, he could have taken this so many directions. The blame game, the excuse game, defend myself game. But instead, he humbles himself here, and and the fact that he did not have relations with her again, that is like the ultimate expression of his sorrow, like his grief over what he has done. Any thoughts on? But he takes full responsibility for his action. He doesn't blame her. He doesn't blame the situation or her deceitfulness. I mean, he just takes, which, I mean, we know that we have so much respect for people that just come clean, but that is not our natural reaction. Our natural reaction is to defend. That's the first thing we want to do, is defend ourselves, defend our action. And so this is just a true active.
Goes all the way back to Cain and Abel.
It goes, yes, it does.
Well, actually,
And
it goes back
Adam
to the garden.
and Eve, yeah. This woman you gave me. Yes, I mean, that's just our human nature. And so for him to come to a place of acknowledging, I mean, God is divinely working in his heart, because we do not do that on our own. God has to be at work for us to ever come to that place of admitting our sin, our sinfulness. Okay, we'll read this last part. And it came about at that time she was giving birth, that behold, there were twins in her womb. Moreover, it took place while she was giving birth, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But it came about as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. Then she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. And that's what Perez means, a breach or to breach. I don't know what to say. That must have been a painful.
It sounds so painful to me.
I know.
Yeah, what if the hand comes
All
out
them twisted
first,
around.
There's definitely something wrong with the delivery.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
there's
that's
just no way
not-
she'd be able to have that.
I know. And I don't see how they were able to switch places. Like, I can't
It just
imagine
seemed to be like
that.
a tangled up ball of yarn
Well,
or something. And
You can push them back I mean, I've helped deliver a lot of
Yes.
calves.
Yes.
And if they're not coming out right, you can sometimes push them back in and reposition them.
Okay.
But he said he pulled his hand back in.
Yeah.
That's just like, oh, wow.
But that was God doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the brother kicked him.
Yeah, it
Beavers,
just boggles
beavers,
me.
that-
Two babies all twisted
I
up in the
know.
birth canal.
I
It just
know.
kind of makes me hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it does, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Mm.
So
What-
somehow, oh, go ahead.
I have a question. God took 2 sons,
Mm-hmm.
they died, and then he was given 2 sons
That's
back.
so good, yes. Mhm.
And they, because they are Judah's children, but they're also the oldest son's child,
Yeah, I don't know
Do
how
they
that
not
works
get-
with the dad.
do they not get the double blessing plus a blessing because they're his child also?
I
I mean, I
have
don't know.
no idea how this is going to
Well, I
play
think being
out.
Judah's child would supersede, wasn't it, the son's child?
Well, it would have been his third.
It's a big old
not his
messy
first
thing,
born.
isn't
It's
it?
a mess. It's a mess. Yes, it is a mess. I don't know how they worked all that out. Yeah, I don't know how that would have worked, but yeah, it's a mess. And like I said, and even, I mean, it was considered incest. Okay, verse 30, and afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. So let's go to Ruth, chapter 4, and this story has a very happy ending. Ruth chapter 4. And we'll begin in verse 18. Well, actually, we can begin in 16. We'll start in 16 because this is so fascinating to me. So Ruth 4:16. Get there. Ruth 4:16. So Ruth 4, chapter 4, verse 16. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. And the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi," so they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. How fascinating that they start with Perez. Like, nobody starts with Perez. They start with Abraham or Judah maybe, but Perez, I thought that was so fascinating that they started with Perez. Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram Amminadab, and to Amminadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz, who's in this book, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. So Perez is in a direct line. I mean, oh my goodness. He's in the direct line of King David, and to this day the greatest king Israel has ever known, except the King of Kings, which we're going to read his genealogy in Matthew 1. It's just and this one does start with Abraham. So Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. To Abraham was born Isaac, and to Isaac Jacob, and to Jacob Judah and his brothers. And to Judah were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar. How interesting that both names are mentioned here. You don't have Jacob and Esau. I mean, it's Perez and Zerah. And then We don't have Sarah's name. We don't have Rebecca. We don't have Rachel. We don't have Leah. We have Tamar's name. The first female listed in the genealogy of Christ, and it's Tamar. Okay, and to Perez was born Hezron, to Hezron Ram, and to Ram was born Amminadab, and to Amminadab Nahshon, and to Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz by Rahab. I don't know if you all knew that, but Boaz, who's the book of Ruth, his mom was Rahab, and she's known in the New Testament as Rahab the prostitute. Just the lineage here. And then to Boaz was born Obed by Ruth, the Moabite, and to Obed Jesse, and to Jesse was born David the king. And all this is the lineage of Jesus. So we've been going through this verse by verse detail through Genesis. And today we have just the very disturbing story on so many levels. I mean, if you're the Most High God and you're coming in the flesh and you're going to be the King of Kings, do you really pick this lineage? I mean, you know, you would want, I don't know. So, and I also find it interesting now that we're reading the details of this family, why the Pharisees took such pride in it. I don't know. I thought that was interesting to think about how they took such pride. And, I mean, this is a family that's a mess. But, yeah, and when Christ chose to come in the flesh, this is the family he chose to be his lineage.
That helped him be all things to all men.
Yes.
Because he's part, you know, he came from incest and harlotry and, you know,
Yes.
all of that's in his
Well,
family.
he's not God
Yes.
because he was a perfect man.
Exactly, and we're not supposed to look at him, right? It's all about him. It's all about what he did on the cross, and it is enough. Yes, and just these are the very sins that he came to atone. I mean, that's the best news of all. Is he took that and I don't know. I just thought that was so interesting, just thinking about that. Like if
Well, I think it's interesting that it says Jacob, the father of Judah, and his brothers.
I know, yeah, they're mentioned.
Yeah, I mean,
Vaguely. I know.
that's just like, why was that thrown in there?
Well, that's
It's
the 12 tribes, right?
those are the 12
So that's-
tribes. Yeah, I guess that could be because they are
Probably.
Israel. That's true. No, they're Israel. So anyway, just very interesting, and it's just interesting that Tamar's mentioned here. Sarah is not. You know, I know it's so interesting. Just all for our learning, all to give us such great hope. And like when they were penning the passages in Genesis for our reading and for our learning, they did not paint Jesus as coming from this very noble family. I mean, it is just, he's exposing the ugliness,
Common
the realness.
everyday.
Yes, common everyday, yes. And again, it is not like when you don't know this and you just Abraham, Isaac, and, you know, you think it's about these men of this amazing faith that we could never be like that. But when you read it, you realize, oh no, it is not about Abraham. It is not about Isaac. It is about their amazing God who can, which brings us to our next verse. And huh?
You picked a great one for the end.
Oh, I just cannot quit thinking about this all week. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it, because this was just, so Romans 8:28 and 29. And we will not ever read 28 without reading 29 too. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. And so my thoughts on this week were so grateful that God doesn't just use talented, amazing people who make really good choices and who are in ideal circumstances. I mean, it's these terrible choices and these horrible consequences, and he can still work it for our salvation. That is an amazing God who's truly sovereign. I mean, a God that can just work with perfect circumstances. I mean, we have a God who can take anything. I mean, he says all things. He is not exaggerating. He can take all things. He can work them together for our good. And by good, first of all, working it towards our salvation and then towards our holiness. And he takes all of our consequences. And he's not a God that micromanages life so that we don't ever have any undesirable circumstances. He doesn't do that. He takes our choices, our consequences, and that suddenly becomes the chiseling tool that makes his son's image in us. And Annalise, I have to use your analogy of the silver. She was so good to teach this. But a silversmith would take silver and put it in this fire, and all the dross comes to the top, all the impurities, and then you take it out and you wipe off the impurities, and then you put it back in the fire. All the impurities come to the top. And so, that's life. I mean, that is life. This life is a refiner's fire, so that we don't have to go through the eternal fire of judgment. This is temporary, and he's purifying us, and he's making us into a holy people, and it can be painful. Oh, and no, it's the best part. So when he knows he's done, when he put it in the fire and you wipe away the dross, he'll continue this process until he can see his reflection in the silver. And I mean, that's life. If you belong to him, then that's what he's doing. And so these circumstances, they don't create bitterness in us. They reveal the bitterness that's already there. It just reveals what's in us. It doesn't create it. It doesn't put it there. It exposes it. Thank goodness. And then we come before the Father and we let him just forgive us and cleanse us and make us clean. And then we're back in the next fire. But that's how we can say with James, count it all joy, brethren, when you face trials of many times, because he's working it for our holiness. And we have to be so grateful for that. Keeps us humble, which is so painful sometimes. He keeps us humble, and he keeps us on our knees, and he keeps us pursuing him. And we're so grateful for that. I had another thought, too. Do you get what?
No, I did.
Yes, I would
thought
love
you
to hear.
explained it very well. And all of those, for those who love God, they're talking about the Christians there.
Yes, born again.
Born again
In
Christians.
fact, to love God is to obey his commands. It's not just those who give lip service. I love the Lord, yes, Lord. No, it's those whose life matches that, who sold out, sacrificing everything to do the will of God. We've laid aside our own will, and we are so and then when we fall short, thank goodness, he can work all, that then, when we mess up and we fall, and we're going to, that becomes the tool he uses to conform us into the image of his Son. Because he's an amazing God, and he can use any circumstance. And so, and along those lines, I was in all my reading, all this started just clicking. This was so here in our story today, and we saw it with the Shechemites today, we saw it with the Canaanites. These Hebrew people, they were very prosperous. They were small in number, very small in number, minorities among the Canaanites, but God was with them and blessing them. And these Canaanites were more than ready to intermarry and become one, to give their daughters in marriage and to merge. And they were more, we saw that today. The Canaanite, they were happy to give their daughters in marriage to these Hebrew people. And then, the Hebrew people were more than willing to conform to the ways of the Canaanite. But God's going to send them into Egypt. And what's fascinating, the Egyptians were not so friendly to foreigners. And especially we're going to read, they despised shepherds. They despise shepherds. So they're not going to want to have anything to do. So what better place to send them? They're going to be slaves in Egypt, in bondage in Egypt, but that's a safe place to birth a nation. This is like their womb. But they're going to go there and they're going to go in a family and they're going to come out a nation. And that's just a safe place because they don't really like foreigner. And so what looks like these awful oppressive, especially if you're the Edomites and you've got all these kings and you're prospering, and then there's those poor Israelites, they're, in bondage. But that's the perfect place to grow a family into a nation and not them intermarry and not become submerged into another culture. So I just thought that was so fascinating. I just had never thought about but the Egyptians are going to despise it. So the willingness to submerge into that culture is just not going to be there. So again, God working everything out to bring back. And remember, all of Scripture is moving us to reconciliation with Christ. We're being reconciled to Him, and this is just on the path to salvation and reconciliation. Okay. Do you have any thoughts or questions? Okay.